So this story seemed very appropriate because of the snow apocalypse and the drinking and the baking. And as you heard from my last name, I have sort of a culinary last name. When I was in 4th grade, people really liked to ask if my dad worked at McDonald's or if I wanted fries with that sort of thing. So this story is about my grandfather, who has that last name. And my sister and I were up in New Jersey, which is where my grandfather's from and where my dad grew up, last week, after they'd had a very big snowstorm. And in that, they had a really big storm when Hurricane Irene came through. When I was in Charleston with my mother, we drove into the hurricane as everyone else was fleeing, and we drove into the hurricane on Friday evening and drank a lot of rum while the storm was raging around, and we had a real hurricane party. It was a lot of fun. But my grandfather in New Jersey at that time, they got hit horribly, and he was out of power for a week. And his house is on a well, which means if he has no power, he doesn't have any water either. And he would not leave his house, which just boggles my mind, but he's a very, very stubborn man who drinks a lot of gin. And so he just stayed in his house with no power and no water for 7 days. Occasionally he'd go to my aunt's house and, take a shower, I hope. So that happened, and in 7 days he was without power, and at the end of it, my aunt and uncle had to come over and use a shop vac to suck out the giant deep freezer that he has down in the basement that he hasn't cleaned out since about 1976. That had, when I was a kid, it had this giant jelly rat in it. It was a rat that was made out of, it was candy. It wasn't a real rat. But it was it was like a gummy worm, but it was a rat. And it was in the freezer all of my childhood that I can remember. And I think one year we finally convinced him that he should let us eat it because we just were so enamored with this rat that was always in the freezer. So that's the kind of freezer that my grandfather had, that my aunt and uncle had to use a shop vac to suck everything out of. And the funny part is that my grandpa doesn't eat, he just drinks gin. And so since my grandmother died about 5 years ago, he really just, maybe he'll have a hot dog or a piece of pizza, but it's pretty much just when my sister and I come to visit and bake him chocolate chip cookies that he eats. So all this food in his freezer, we'd made him huge pans of lasagna, and we'd cut it into little squares and wrapped them all in aluminum foil and written little love notes on them for him and put that in the freezer because we were like, well, he knows how to use the microwave. Maybe he'll actually eat these. But those got sucked up by the shop vac, the lasagnas of like 2 years ago. So he wasn't actually eating those. So when my sister and I came this time, we decided, obviously, we had to make him cookies, and we asked him if he would want us to make him cookies, and he just looks at us and he goes, "Oh, say it again." And so we make our list and we go to the store, and we made a quadruple batch of Nestle Toll House cookies, which are the ones that my grandmother always made. And her secret ingredient was that she used an extra stick of butter, an entire extra stick of butter in these cookies. So when you cooked them, they would like spread out like pancakes on the cookie sheet, and they would, a whole cookie would take up one Ziploc bag, and I always wondered how she did that, and that's how. Me, on the other hand, being the granddaughter that is interested in nutrition, and I have a whole suite of grains in my pantry and things like that. When I'm making cookies, I do things like grate zucchini into them and put in oats, because I'm like, well, at least this way he's getting some whole grains, which is good for him because he has high cholesterol, so he needs the oats in the cookies. So we went to the grocery store and we did our shopping, and I told you about the Hurricane Irene, but more recently they had that big snowstorm on Halloween, and they had to cancel Halloween for all the little kids. They couldn't go trick-or-treating, and they had to wait, including my little cousins Meg and Philip. And so Grandpa yet again had to clean out his refrigerator, but this time it was worse, because when the power came back on, it actually surged, and that meant that it blew out the compressor in the refrigerator, not in the freezer unit of the freezer unit, just in the refrigerator unit. So everything was fine in the freezer, fine. meaning that it had sat in the freezer for 5 days, and then the freezer turned back on, so it was fine. But anything in the refrigerator, you couldn't put it back in because it was actually broken. And so was the microwave, and the phone. He didn't have a phone still. It had been 5 days. It's 5 days, plus it had been another week, and he still didn't have a phone because that had broken too with the electrical surge. And what else? Other things had broken. He had a little pile of a graveyard of small appliances on the dining room table. But in the porch, this became referred to as the walk-in while my sister and I were there, because the porch is approximately 40 degrees in New Jersey in November. So he put everything from the refrigerator onto the porch. But of course, then it got unseasonably warm. And so, there's things out there like bacon and eggs and milk and, and pickles. I kid you not, with expiration dates before I was born. And so I'm like, Grandpa, you didn't eat these pickles in the past 27 years. Do you think you're really going to eat them if the refrigerator comes back on and we can put them into the refrigerator? Like, let's just throw them away. It's okay. It's okay. This jam, I know we made you this jam, but it's growing things. It's waving at us. So let's just throw it away. It's going to be okay. So while we're at the store, my sister and I have the brilliant brainstorm that they make milk that you don't have to refrigerate. It's UHT milk, and it's all over Europe, which is where my sister lives, and so we decide that we will find it, and we do, and we find these nice little 2%, 1 serving size, all boxed up together milks that he can leave on his porch for weeks on end, and he won't have to finish the whole thing. He can just get 1 serving size of it, and he'll have milk. And so we bought that as well as our cookie ingredients, and then we spent the afternoon in the kitchen making four batches of cookies, which we also gave to his neighbor, who is so kind as to blow all the leaves out of his driveway and remove all the snow for our, I think, 78-year-old grandfather who thinks that he can do these things for himself but really can't. So we took the cookies over to Mr. DeLello as well to thank him for taking care of our grandpa when we're not there. And in the process of being in the kitchen and cooking, and our father was there, and it was one of those times when you're in the kitchen just for hours, and interesting conversations happened at that time, and conversations that really needed to happen, because my parents got divorced about 2 years ago, and we've never had that conversation with our dad of just, our sister and our dad and I just kind of being like, okay, now you have to be our dad without our family. And so that's where that happened, in the kitchen while I was making cookies for my grandfather.